But smack in the middle of Israel, a controversy. A controversial bill to impose new regulations on NGOs funded mainly by foreign governments passed an all-important hurdle yesterday, as the committee representing the cabinet approved sending it to the Knesset, that's the Israeli parliament, for passage or rejection. Opponents of the bill say it unfairly targets left-wing organizations. It's called the Transparency Bill. It is sponsored by Justice Minister Yael Lavie, and it would require nonprofits receiving more than half of their funding from foreign governments to officially note it in their official publication. In practice, the legislation would affect left-wing organizations almost exclusively. The legislation is expected to receive the support of all of the coalition's factions when it is put to a preliminary Knesset vote later this week, as its passage into law was promised to Habayit Yehudi, that's an Israeli political party, as part of its coalition agreement with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Let's take a look at the following report. Break it down from there.
The Israeli parliament is divided once again, this time over the controversial Transparency Bill. What some view as a modern-day witch hunt is seen by others as a long overdue move. The Israeli Ministerial Committee on Legislation endorsed Sunday draft legislation aimed at toughening regulations on NGOs which receive funds from abroad.
The Transparency Bill is aimed at showing the public information it deserves to see. When foreign countries interfere in internal affairs of another country, the public needs to know.
According to the bill initiated by the hawkish Justice Minister Yael Lavie, non-governmental organizations which receive at least half of its funding from foreign entities will have to publicly reveal the details of their donors. Deliberately or not, this classification puts four major left-wing Israeli organizations under the spotlight. In the wake of the very heated public debate over the legitimacy of such groups, this bill triggers not only a massive uproar on behalf of the Israeli left, but also infuriates the European Union, since many of the donors to those groups are none other than European governments. According to publications, the EU's ambassador to Israel told the Justice Minister that the Union is deeply concerned about the bill, viewing it a part of an increasing trend of shaming certain organizations.
This bill only deals with transparency, an important value of the EU as well, and I expect the Union to respect the democratic decision of the democratic Israeli society.
Other drafts of this controversial bill were blocked in the past, even by the Israeli Prime Minister. But this time, despite or maybe because of the prodigious storm, it seems to be smoothly moving forward. But simultaneously, what is also moving forward in a rapid pace is the growing alienation and division within the Israeli society.
Joined in studio by advocate Netta Patrick, executive director of Yesh Din. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Also with us, Avichai Stoller, former director of research at Breaking the Silence. Good morning to you. Good morning. And of course, I-24 News diplomatic correspondent Tal Shalev. Can't do this without you. To begin with, I'm asking, this is going to pass, that's what it feels like, right?
Well, it passed the preliminary stage at the Ministerial Committee of Legislation. Now it has to continue to the Israeli parliament, where it has to go through a few readings, and the bill might be undergoing some changes in this process because the Kulanu party, the centrist party, we might say the leftist party of this coalition, has declared that it will not support the bill unless it undergoes some changes. And the main change that we understand that they want to insert into this bill is to make it also apply to NGOs that receive private funding from abroad, not only state funding, because the problem with this bill is that it distinguishes between state funding and private funding, while most of the NGOs that enjoy state funding are left-wing NGOs that receive funding from European states. And when you look at the right-wing NGOs, they're also funded from abroad, but privately. And this doesn't, this bill doesn't contain any reservations about private funding at all.
About private funding in that respect. Now, this bill is very contentious. Before we start the discussion on this, it was already referred to by the European Union ambassador to Israel, who said the following: the demand for transparency is legitimate, but this bill is discriminating and specifically aims to harm organizations that criticize government policies. It will have a negative impact on the perception of Israel and its treatment in Europe as an open and democratic society. Now, we are also joined via Skype from the Efrat settlement by Dr. Ronen Shoval, chairman of Professors for a Strong Israel and one of the authors of the controversial bill. Mr. Cheval, I want to ask you, I mean, firstly, I'm assuming that you were happy, but when you were listening to such criticism from the EU ambassador to Israel about this bill, doesn't that bode also for, if we're looking at how Israel, which seems to be such a big issue, how Israel looks overseas, it's not looking as good PR for Israel, this bill. Many overseas are calling it undemocratic.
Well, I think this is a huge hypocrisy because the way that the European countries behave to Israel is undemocratic by itself. You can't support, in the name of democracy, organizations that are fighting against our democracy, and you can't have a double standard. Think what happened if Israel would support organizations in Spain, for example, that are advocating for the freedom of Catalonia. Or think what happened if Israel would create an organization in United Kingdom trying to put on trial Tony Blair for war crimes. Well, those phenomena are exactly what's happening right now. B'Tselem is working and getting money from Spain, and Breaking the Silence is getting money from the British embassy. And this is something that democracy doesn't supposed to behave to each other. So I take the way that the European ambassador said what he said. I think this is a huge hypocrisy.
I mean, you would argue it's hypocrisy. I'd like you to stay with us, Mr. Stoller, of Breaking the Silence, apropos here in studio, claiming that it is a hypocrisy, but saying that funding from overseas governments is actually destabilizing Israel's democracy in itself. What would you say to that?
First of all, I'm afraid that here is a clear case when the camel can't see his own hump. Because Mr. Shoval and his organization that he founded, Im Tirtzu, are obsessing about funding of human rights groups in Israel for years. Even though our funding is completely transparent and has been this way for years now, we only receive money from bodies which are friendly to Israel, while the organization that he started is not transparent, and the only thing we know about it is that it receives money from anti-Semites that said that Hitler is a messenger of God, and the party that he is a member of now, Abait HaYehudi, is collecting, its members are collecting most of their money abroad, and for example, Minister of Justice Shaked received funding from a drug dealer which was apprehended by Interpol, Serge Muller. So I think that Mr. Shoval needs to be a bit more, at least, modest.
Mr. Shoval?
Yeah, come on. First of all, half of what he said that is not correct, and the second half is a lie. So I don't know even where to start. The facts are very, very simple. His organization taking money from, getting money from organizations that sit in Ramallah, and taking with his money is making. Blaming me and my friends and all the people in Israel in making war crimes. So, enough is enough. And you need to be transparent. You need to tell all the world that you are getting money, that you are not authentic, that you are getting money from other countries, and you are their agent. And let the Israeli public know that you are an agent of a different country, and then they could decide. But you can't, the fact that other countries are giving money to these kinds of organizations, this is a double standard, and this needs to be stopped. And if Israel would do the same thing that like England is doing to us, I assume that 24 hours afterward, our ambassador would be back at home, because this is a way that democracy does not supposed to behave. When right now the European countries are giving money to extreme tiny organization who does not represent anyone, and with this amount of money they have voiced more of the majority, and this is exactly the delegitimation process, blaming us on war crime, calling it an apartheid state, and the fact that Breaking the Silence is not a democratic. Let me explain why it's so important. Democracy means that we have a vote. And this is how we're going. He can be against the settlement. I can be pro-settlement. That's okay. If he wants to change the reality, he can go to vote. But he's taking money. And trying to impose and trying to impose on the Israeli society his values, not in a democratic way. And that's something really, really dangerous.
But Mr. Shoval, the only other thing we're going to argue, one can argue back, is that in democracy also everybody's entitled to their opinion and to voice that opinion.
Exactly.
Hold on, one second, Mr. Shoval. I just want to ask also, Advocate Netta Patrick, Executive Director of Yesh Din. When we're talking about this law, what will it do to Yesh Din? What will it do?
Well, this law won't do anything significant to Yesh Din because it's not really a transparency law. It's a law that its purpose is to shame and label human rights organizations. And this is its aim, and this is what it will do. We have no problem wearing whatever badge Mr. Shoval wants when we come to the Knesset, but the only purpose is to signal us out as moles, as traitors. This is a process that this right-wing government is leading, and Mr. Shoval and Im Tirtzu are helping her out. The whole purpose is to silence us and to silence our criticisms of Israel's policies in the West Bank, in the occupied territory. And in that sense, we don't care wearing a badge. All our donors are exposed. You can read them on our website. It's not a transparency law. It's a shaming law.
Eital, really
just
quickly,
to add
yes.
one thing, that this law is just the latest in a long list of bills that have been legislated in Israel in the past 5 or 6 years that have been demonized and have created a lot of sense of danger to the democracy. Eventually, nothing happened after these laws. When you look at what happened after these bills were legislated, not many lawsuits were brought on them. So it is mainly PR damage, I believe, to Israel in the world.
I want to thank everybody here. At least we continue talking.